Thank you very much. I titled the talk Mind the Gap, and when I did the title I was thinking in the sort of London Underground sense of looking out for gaps, but actually I did realise subsequently that we could think about it as actually looking after the gaps as well, and I think that's what we've been trying to do in the Little Ouse Headwaters project over the last significant number of years. So I just want to talk through actually a whole series of maps so you can see how we have gone about trying to defragment a very fragmented landscape in a fairly small area on the Norfolk and Suffolk border. So for anybody who's unaware of where we are, this is where we are. We're in the sort of lawless border country on the edge of Suffolk and Norfolk. And we are in that rather geographically strange area where two rivers part and flow in different directions, even though there's absolutely no topography to make them do that. So it's a rather unusual landscape situation. So we have the Waveney going east and the Little Ouse heading west, and I thought rather than going back 25 years, I'd go back quite a lot longer. It's good to see that even in the 1790s or 1780s, we had different surveyors working on different sides of the county boundary and not actually joining up very well. But if you take the old maps from Faden and Hodkinson, you can see that in this area, if you can just about push them together, well, first of all, the river is very wiggly, and I can assure you the river is not wiggly now. But secondly, the pink areas here are the tracts of wetland and commons on those maps, and obviously there were quite significant areas of wetland and common at that time. It all changed pretty quickly subsequently with the enclosures in the early 1800s and onwards. So that's what it was. If we fast forward quite a long way to the 1940s, we still have fairly extensive open areas of fen, valley fen, in this region. We've got some very good aerial photos from around the wartime years that show what was there then. But the headwaters of the Little Ouse in particular had subsequently become a very fragmented and, in wildlife terms, neglected area. The area has multiple designations. There are county wildlife sites, SSSIs, the Waveney Little Ouse Valley Fens, SAC. For a long time, it was quite hard to see what help that was, to be honest, because the valley fens on the Little Ouse side in particular had become extremely fragmented and damaged. There are very many different landowners in this very small area. I looked on the map the other day, and within our core project area, we've got at least 20, probably more landowners owning riparian land within a 2-kilometre stretch of river. So there's landowner fragmentation, there's local authority fragmentation, we've got 2 county councils, we've got several district councils, we've got 8 or so parish councils, 2 wildlife trusts, and so on. So it's an area with many different organisations with interests as well as the landowners. Unfortunately, this area fell between 2 environmentally sensitive areas, between the Broads and the Brecks. So we were literally in a gap, and I think that was one of the reasons why this area in particular suffered. Within the wider valley, there's quite intensive farming of various types, and so we ended up in the sort of 1980s, 1990s with most of the sites in the valley being, first of all, unmanaged, and secondly, damaged. Just to show you some of the scale of change that has occurred, this is 1947 aerial photo of the area outlined in Rathersblow, Norton, Little Fen. You can see there's very little in the way of tree cover. You can see the peat diggings in the landscape there, because these sites were used for taking peat for fuel for right up until the war years. And the block of trees there is that site in the 1990s, so completely grown over, partly as a result of lack of management, partly as a result of lack of water. And this side of the valley did suffer from the abstraction from the Redgrave borehole that's also so badly affected Redgrave and Lopham Fen. So if we look in a little bit more detail, this was the situation in around 1995. The light green areas here are reserves managed by Suffolk Wildlife Trust. So the large area to the east is Redgrave and Lopham Fen. The two patches of Thelneatham Fen, and then on the western edge down to Hopton Fen, and beyond that there's Western Fen, and so on. And the areas in darker green are the sites that local community management first started on. This is just before the formation of the Little Ouse Headwaters project. We started a village conservation group to work on the Blow Norton Fens. And these fens were rapidly growing over with trees. We've done an awful lot of tree clearance as a result, although we're still leaving quite a lot of wet woodland in place. In an interesting example of convergent evolution, the Blow Norton village group then discovered there was a Hinderclay village group doing exactly the same thing on the other side of the county boundary. So the River Little Ouse runs between these two sites. So there was local activity and locally concerned people. Hinderclay Fen is quite interesting. It's not just a fen, it also has quite an area of sandy heathland along the valley edge. And we had local small-scale works going on, but in 2002 we had an opportunity to up the ante somewhat. The EU 10 project, which Norfolk and Suffolk County Councils were involved with, gave us an opportunity to do some large-scale work, and as a result we had to become a more formal organisation, so we became a registered charity in 2002. It's community-based, it's run entirely by volunteers and still is, so we have no paid staff, we have no premises, which makes our filing system quite interesting. So that was the situation, just these sites being rather informally managed by village groups. The advent of the 10 project allowed us to move on and start expanding. So we acquired this site next to Redgrave and Lopham Fen, the Frith. Initially, some of these sites we buy, some of them are on leases. So the Frith, for example, and the Blow Norton Fens are leased from local village charities. They're poor's allotments. They're the rubbish land that was left over at the enclosures for the poor people to make use of, and that's probably why they've survived. It's because they are unfarmable, really. Okay, so the Frith, again, a flat, fairly sandy site, not much wetland on that site, although there is some. We then also managed to lease a site called the Lowes from Blow Norton Church Lands Trust. So we're dealing with lots of little small local charities here with our leases. One of our issues is how we can make these leases secure for the long term, of course. Again, a good wetland site. This lower field that we're looking at here has probably never been ploughed. And significant leap forward for the organisation in 2003 was when we actually bought our first site, which is named Betty's Fen because it used to be owned by someone called Betty, who sold it to us directly. It's part of the Blow Norton Thelneatham SSI and completely contiguous with Blow Norton Fen. The picture shows what it looked like after some restoration rather than before, when it was almost impenetrable scrub. Moving on, got the bit between our teeth in terms of land purchase, and through tracking down absentee landowners and making them an offer, we managed to acquire a site we've called Parker's Piece, again because we bought it from Mr. Parker. Again, adjacent to the river, a site that had been badly degraded, used agriculturally as arable land, then used for pigs, but restored to wetland as a result of some of our project work. At the same time as Parker's Piece, and by amazing coincidence, we got the piece right next to it, Bleswick's Bank, which is beginning to fill in the jigsaw and link up these sites on either side of the river. Okay. Bleswick's Bank, when we acquired it, was a plantation woodland, an unmanaged plantation woodland. There were woodland grants around at one stage where lots of people in the area planted really dense plantation woodland, never managed it, never thinned it, and it was just abandoned. So there was a lot of tree removal to return this site to its former wetland state. We then got quite ambitious and moved west. As a result of the success I think that we'd had with some of these early sites, people have actually started asking us to take on sites. And this site, Scarf Meadows, while not currently having great conservation interest, has enormous landscape potential. It's a very nice wet meadow, and it was on the market, and many local people were very keen that we should raise funds and buy it, so we did. And having done that, then the people of Garblesham said, well, can you please come and manage our common? So we took on Brimscott Common on a long lease. This is a very sort of Breckland type of site, actually, very, very sandy. It was about 90% ragwort when we took it on. It had been very seriously undergrazed and not managed, but we've got a big programme of restoration going on there as well. And so on. So I thought I'd put some animals in because you'll probably think, oh, another site. But again, through being in the local community, through our trustees who all come from the local community, talking to local landowners and so on, we managed to make an offer for what is now called Webb's Fen to Mr. Webb, who had been one of the fiercest critics in the local area of conservation. There is a lot of concern locally about places being too wet. Mr. Webb was certainly amongst the most vocal of those, but he clearly liked the colour of our money, and he was retiring anyway, so he sold us this site, Webb's Fen, which we are managing through grazing, and we filled in some of the internal drainage ditches to raise the internal water levels and make it wetter. We've removed trees and created a scrape there as well. And moving on to more recent acquisitions, New Fen. We're clearly running out of names, or we called it New Fen because it's really part of Thelneatham Fen, and at Thelneatham there's Thelneatham Old Fen and Thelneatham Middle Fen, so we called this one New Fen. You can see from the picture it doesn't look an awful lot like a fen. Again, it's another of these sites that's plantation woodland, unmanaged. Part of it is relatively dry, but part of it is completely contiguous with Thelneatham Fen. We've done lots of things like topographical survey and peat surveys, and some of this site is underlain by peat. So we have high hopes that it will be restored, part of it at least will be restored to fen sites. And then bringing you right up to date, very recently, 2015, we've again offered a site by a local landowner who wanted to sell it. So we've just bought this meadow in Hinderclay, which has been used mainly for hay production for some considerable time. It's not a classic flowery hay meadow at the moment, but we hope it will be sometime soon. And that's on a tributary to the Little Ouse, so all of our sites have some connection with the river. Again, it doesn't look much at the moment. We hope we can make it more diverse. It has some really nice old hedges around it as well. And completely up to date, just before Christmas, this tiny bit we filled in, if I can just take you back, there's the gap. And we just managed to fill in this final bit of the jigsaw of Blow-Norton and Thelneatham Fens SSSI. So the whole of that SSSI between ourselves and Suffolk Wildlife Trust is now in conservation management for the first time ever. So we're incredibly pleased about that. And I should say that a lot of this work has been made possible by support from the Heritage Lottery Fund. And certainly the purchase of this final piece of the jigsaw has been largely supported by another HLF grant to the organisation. So the current position right now is that we've gone from really having very, very few sites in any sort of management to having 14 separate, although very small sites, a total of 71 hectares under restoration management by the project. We've got a high level of support and involvement in the local community and beyond. Because we've been funded by Heritage Lottery Fund, we've been keeping records of our volunteer hours, and we've clocked sort of 1,500 volunteer hours per year, and in some of our years this varies a bit depending on what we're doing, but we have lots of support as well as some objections locally. We've pulled in over £1.3 million of funding since 2002. That's been through major grants such as the Lottery Fund, EU grants, landfill tax credits. We run an appeal to charitable trusts, which brings in all sorts of funding from all sorts of sources, from £50 to £20,000 at any one go. And all our sites are in high-level stewardship, which is absolutely critical for our ongoing routine site management. Without that funding, we couldn't do that. So I'd just like to end by saying that might not look like a wetland. It's typical of the sort of site we take on, though. Many of the sites we've acquired have looked like this at the start, and, you know, we have lost a few trustees in the wilderness from time to time, but they've all emerged again eventually. Nettles are our speciality, but with the help of funding, we've used contractors, local contractors mostly. We've done some large-scale, for us at least, restoration work. It doesn't quite compare with Lake and Heath, but we've moved stuff around. We've created scrapes. We've removed trees. And the great thing about wetlands is they respond so quickly. This is within 3 years of that nettle bed being cleared, and here we are onto some really nice looking wetland. And of course, because we've got the existing Thelnethan Blow Norton fens, we've got a great source of seed bank and species colonisation, so these sites do recover very quickly. This is what most of us feel like most of the time when running this project. But before I completely stop, can I just do a plug? We are running a BioBlitz on the last weekend of June this year, and we'd love to see you all there. Okay, thanks.